Well, welcome everyone. We're so glad you're here. I'm guessing that everyone here is passionate and sees the value of local journalism and maybe is concerned about the way things are going. And the topic today is rebuilding trust, specifically journalism's role in rebuilding trust, bridging the divide, so that we can, as we used to do, talk to each other, not necessarily agree, but agree to disagree and have respect. And just a brief introduction. This is actually, I'm going to quote a little bit from Christian Science Monitor editorial. Is everyone here familiar with it? Has anyone not heard of the Christian Science Monitor? All right, that's good. That's good news. So their editorial board, after the vice presidential debate last week, they wrote a piece, and I just think this sort of encapsulates everything in our purpose here. In their readiness, the vice presidents, in their readiness to find agreement amid their policy differences, the two political opponents and the moderators nudging them toward clarity and decorum showed that the tensions inherent in democracy can be resolved in deliberation, elevated by reason, humility, and respect. Those qualities, in fact, are driving a vigorous self-reflection and renewal among some journalists, particularly at the local level, at a time when their industry is contracting and public trust in public institutions and the media is low. On average, 2 newspapers close every week in the United States. A 2022 Gallup Foundation survey found that 71% of Americans who distrust national news outlets also have less faith in the country's political process. Yet that very same survey found that more than half of the respondents feel that local journalists care about the communities they cover. In an essay in Columbia Journalism Review, New York Times chairman A.G. Sulzberger wrote last year that common facts, a shared reality, and a willingness to understand our fellow citizens across tribal lines are the most important ingredients in enabling a diverse, pluralistic society to come together to self-govern. So that's what we're about here today, and we're just thrilled to have the 3 panelists. You people who are local know Craig Borges, executive editor and general manager of the Sun Chronicle. It wouldn't be happening if it weren't for Craig. Amazing job he's done. Those of you who subscribe to other newspapers and have seen them turned into ghost newspapers know the blood, sweat, and tears it takes to keep the Sun Chronicle going. Noelle Swan is right now editor of the Christian Science Monitor Weekly. But prior to that, her background, she led science, technology, and environmental coverage at the Christian Science Monitor, and that's her background. And something I found out about her that made me respect her more than anything, when she first graduated from Harvard, she was a preschool teacher for 12 years, and that generates respect. And then John Yemma, our, as they say, seasoned journalist, always sounds like you're ready to be thrown in the barbecue. John Yemma has been newsroom manager and editor, as well as a correspondent and columnist, many roles at the Christian Science Monitor, the Boston Globe, the Dallas News, United Press International, and the San Antonio Express News. And John is going to act as moderator, interviewing Craig and Noelle. So I hope you all find this worth coming out for. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for doing this. This is a wonderful opportunity, I think, for us to all begin to kind of consider the importance of journalism and the importance of trust. And so what we're going to do now, you guys remember the old saying, think globally, act locally? Well, We have a global and a local, and this is, I think, what's really important as a citizen, to understand the world and then to take action, and that action is often done in a very local way. Just to pick up on what Cheryl was talking about this kind of creative destruction that is going on right now within the world of the internet and newspapers, the loss of newspapers that's occurring. I remember when I was working at the Monitor and then I jumped over to the Globe, and I was chatting with Brian Mooney, who was one of the reporters at the Globe who grew up on the North Shore, and he began by delivering newspapers. This was in the 1950s, and he said, you know, you could go on any city block. I think was he in Lowell? I don't remember exactly what town he was in, but he said every afternoon when he would deliver newspapers, he'd deliver the Boston Herald Traveler, the Boston Traveler, the Herald. He had 5 different newspapers, including, by the way, the Christian Science Monitor, and he said every 5th house would have the Monitor. Everybody was getting a number of different newspapers, and these newspapers were blanketing the neighborhoods. But then, of course, we've had this decrease that occurred well before the internet, which was all of those newspapers kind of consolidated into the Globe and the Herald, and the Monitor's still around, but in a slightly different form. So we've been through this period of change within the news business for a long time, but I think we can all agree that it's accelerated in the internet age. And there are a number of reasons for that, and I thought maybe we would start with Craig, where we talk about the importance of keeping the fire burning locally, why that matters so much. You know, I've read, and I think a lot of you have read, that without watchdogs, keeping an eye on people who have control over the treasury of a city or of a state, that you don't know what they're doing. It's just all happening in the dark. So Craig, maybe you could talk a little bit about the mission in Attleboro and the kind of the stresses you're under, but also what works.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Cheryl, for organizing this. This is incredible. She did all of the work, actually. I was talking to John early on the phone this week, and one of the things I always tell people is, especially now, you know, it's Trump Harris, Trump Biden, Trump Clinton, you know, this whole national thing. And I always say, the person who's going to kick you in the butt first is going to be your local selectman, city council, mayor, school committee. And it is amazing to me, pretty much everyone in my sphere of friends and, you know, college professors and everything, they know what's going on with Trump and Harris, and they know the details. They don't know who their city councilors are. And it amazes me. If you just look at, you know, November 5th, 4th, whenever the election is, there'll be 90% turnout or something like that, 80%. And you go to a local election and, I don't know, some elections down to 10 or even less percent, 8%, you know. Some towns don't even have elections because, well, they have to have an election, but there's no competitive races because no one runs. And so at the Sun Chronicle, you know, I realized this, especially after 2016, when it became so separate, so divided in the country, with Trump and Clinton, that we had, you know, it's always been local, but it never mattered more to me than, because if we're not watching the local officials, who is? And the Washington Post has the best motto, democracy dies in darkness. And I can give you a quick example. We cover 10 towns, from Seekonk up to Foxborough. And I have a seasoned reporter here, Hank Riley, who worked for the Sun Chronicle for ages. And Hank can tell you, we covered every single town, went to every town meeting, every selectmen's meeting, every school committee meeting. I started at the Sun Chronicle in '97. We had 40 people in the newsroom, a mix of editors, reporters, and photographers. I'm down to 10, 5 of whom are part-time. So that's the difference in 20-something years. And so I'll give you one local example. It's the town of Seekonk. We had correspondents there. We'd we'd send a full-time reporter there for the big meetings. I had to pull my correspondent from them because I couldn't afford to pay the correspondent, and these people make 35, 40 bucks a story. You spend 4 hours at a selectmen's meeting, you write it up and you're getting 40 bucks. That's all I could afford, had to pull them. Seekonk, and I don't care if somebody's from here, from Seekonk, I haven't trusted their selectmen and their leadership in a number of years for different things they've pulled. I can't cover them anymore. No one else covers Seekonk anymore. Providence Journal pulled out years ago, Fall River Herald pulled out years ago. Yeah, if there's a murder or some big issue, the TV stations will come, whether it's Providence or Boston, but no one covers them on a day-to-day. They went through 3 police chiefs and a fire chief all in a row, and I filed Freedom of Information for the first one, but it's so costly and so time-consuming, I had to give it up because it's a small circulation that we have in there. I wouldn't give it up for Attleboro, North Attleboro, because that's our core, but I had to give it up, and since then they went through 2 other police chiefs, and then they fired the fire chief that they had just hired, then hired her back. Who knows why? Because I just can't cover it. And that's taxpayers' money. So there's a perfect local example of, and town officials and city officials know they can do this because we had an incident in Mansfield over a police chief situation, and I'm not giving anything away here. Kevin Dumas, our former mayor, is town manager there, and we had to file Freedom of Information. He fought me every single way, every single filing. We appealed to the state. We won every single one from the state, but they know they'll wait it out, and they know we have no money, and we have to get a lawyer involved and stuff. So this is the insidious thing that's happening. And there's a lot of public relations firms now, and there's one guy, John Guilfoyle, he worked for us for a short time, he worked at the Globe. Brilliant guy, he started his own PR firm. He has all the towns, so if something happens in a town, they do a press release. It's fine if there's a fatal car crash, somebody died, and that's basic. But they're going to tell you what they want to tell you. So they're not going to tell you if there's some kind of financial mess. They're not going to send out a press release on that. And that's where local journalism matters. And this is what's happening just locally, is how hard it is to get to the bottom of that.
So that is a real problem. By the way, I was going to say that we're going to go for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to take questions. So if you have questions, be keeping them in mind, and we'll open it up toward the end. And I'm going to turn to Noelle now. We're going to talk a little bit about the global picture. I asked her to kind of survey the folks at the Monitor and the people in the political world, in the political reporters there, and give us a sense of how this plays out on a national and even international scale, this kind of the sea changes that are occurring within the world of journalism and what that does. You know, we're obviously going to be describing a problem at first, but maybe then we can move on to solutions. But let's talk about the problem to begin with. What's the feeling about trust and division and even just the quality of information that people are getting right now?
Yeah, there's obviously the economic side of the story, which Craig really touched on there, and it's heartbreaking to hear how much of a struggle it is in these small communities, and that plays out all over the country. And there are plenty of communities that don't have a Craig there to try and scrape by, and to try and get the information out to constituents. But when you go up to the national press and the international press, there too has been this massive sea change that has happened, where first of all, the amount of information that is out there that is just flooding the internet is remarkable. And it makes, on the one hand, it's helpful in that it gives, there are people who now have voices and have a place to share their ideas that they didn't before. But it makes it incredibly difficult for the average consumer to know who to trust. And and every time they encounter any outlet that is fostering misinformation or where they end up feeling burned, that ends up reflecting on the body of the press as a whole. And so we definitely feel this in our reporting as well, that in many ways, it has gotten harder to get people to talk to us. And let's see, one of our longtime political reporters who has covered presidential campaigns for decades, Francine Kiefer, she was in Arizona in 2022, and she was attempting to cover a Republican political rally. She and her photographer were kicked out of that rally because they felt that the Monitor was biased because we had not published stories that were declaring that the election had been stolen. We were pointing out the facts along those lines and talking about where there were legitimate discrepancies, but we did not toe that line. So they felt that we just were not available and should not be allowed to cover that. She's had other experiences where she was approaching a candidate to talk to them, and the press person threw their body in front of her to shield the person from the press. And just as Craig is saying with these local politicians, the press needs to have access to our politicians. That is how we find accountability. That's how we understand where they are coming from. If they know that there is a vacuum, there are going to be things happening that we would rather not happen, and that the public needs to know about. And so that we're definitely seeing a sea change there, and that's frustrating. But I guess sort of looking at the other side of the equation, there is something else that is happening too, where you're starting to see young people becoming much more interested in politics. And I came of age at a time where it just wasn't really talked about very much. I grew up in a family of journalists, so I had always paid attention to it, but my peers didn't know anything about, or many of my peers, I should not say all of them, but many of my peers really had no idea what was going on politically. And these days there is a lot more interest that is happening, and part of that is that there are news outlets that are speaking to them, and that are speaking in the language that they speak. And so, in a sense, there are some good changes that have come about as a result of this altered landscape that we're all sort of struggling with in journalism. But the ground is still incredibly shaky, and we're trying to find our footing, all of us. And it's a challenge, but it's really heartening to see so many people here today who are interested in talking about this and see value in having news as a part of this conversation. So thank you all for coming. That's very encouraging for me, because there's a lot we deal with that is not encouraging. So I appreciate that.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the positive side of the change, because it is true that in the past, if you were in a one newspaper town, I think you would get one particular point of view, and that might create a shared reality, but that might also have skewed things a little bit, because there weren't enough people who were also watching the watchdogs. Mm-hmm. And that, Craig, maybe we can go back to you on this. People have talked about citizen journalism. People have talked about people who aren't journalists jumping in and monitoring things like Seekonk city activities. What is that happening? What is it how do you get that to happen? And is it trustworthy when it happens?
That became a big catchphrase in the late 90s, especially when the internet came out. We don't, especially the money crunchers. You don't need journalists. You can just have John Smith from down the street send in. I think it was George Bernard Shaw said what's funny about being a writer is most people would never say, they'll call a plumber. My toilet doesn't work. I got to call a plumber. I got to call an electrician. No one says, I can fix that. But everyone says, I can write that. And so it's very frustrating. But besides that, what I found with citizen journalism is the people who want to get involved for the most part, and I don't mean to disparage the whole public, but if somebody has a gripe, has an issue. It happens a lot at the school level. A parent will be like, oh, there was one woman who started an online newspaper in New York, outside of New York City, and the New York Times did a story on her and said, this is the wave of journalism. This was about 4 or 5, during COVID probably. And right away I'm reading the article and I'm a skeptic because she's only involved because her kids are in school and she's not happy with the way the school department's going. Sort of like coach for Little League, or coach for the, they'll help out with the Little League, but once their kids go on, they don't care about the Little League anymore. It's sort of that what I find, and especially locally, somebody may have a problem with Seekonk selectmen, and they'll report, but once, it's tough. I mean, you're not getting paid, so it's difficult. Who's going to go through that and the wherewithal to stick with it unless you're a professional? And the other thing is trustworthiness because of that, because they're coming at an angle, there's a gripe already. So you got to be careful of that. And that's why I feel citizen journalism never really took off. There's a lot of good people out there who their goal is good, but and then it's a brutal, even if you start your own online thing, it's a 24/7 job. And if you're not getting money, or you're getting very little money, like some grant, there's a lot of startups on the web, they're going to fail. Big corporations, like we're owned by a corporation, we barely make it. We are barely surviving. When I said we're down from 40 to down to 10 people, 5 full-timers, it's every single day is a struggle. And I don't know, I'll be honest, I don't know, do we have a year, 5 years? I hope. There's no guarantee, because it's always that close to the bone on survival. So citizen journalism, it's a great concept. I wish it would work. I find it, I don't mean to be Nancy negative on it, but I find it's a failure.
So for both Craig and Noelle, are there any green shoots out there? Are there anything, citizen journalism probably doesn't work, but is there anything that's working? I mean, I am reminded of these independent nonprofits that are operating. For instance, I'm living in Plymouth now, and the Plymouth Independent, and there's one in New Bedford.
Yeah,
and
New Bedford,
there are a number of them around the Boston area that have sprung up. By being a nonprofit, they don't have quite the need for advertising, but they have to have money to go, so they do a lot of fundraising. Is that an alternative in your community?
You would hope. I mean, I had hopes for that at one time. What is it in Florida? The Point Institute.
Yeah.
And, they have their newspapers, and then the National Public Radio model. They get so much money from the government at the same time, and now WGBH is on the rocks. Who knows if they're going to survive? A lot of layoffs and everything. You would think it would go that way, but I'm very pessimistic on the way society is about journalism. Is people don't have time, they don't have the money or whatever, and they're unwilling. Those nonprofits like the New Bedford Light or something, they struggle all the time. And you get a lot of former, usually retired, or people who are out of journalism and they'll work for them. But if you're looking for a career, if you need money to survive, I don't know how these nonprofits can get enough money in to make it viable. And
they only post usually 1 or 2 stories a week.
Yeah, exactly. And they do it. They'll pick a big issue. So the day to day, it's more convincing. The Boston Globe did a good job in Providence. They saw a hole in the lack of journalism. They really moved in there. They hired some veteran journalists from the Projo, and then they built it since then. So there's an idea where they don't do the newspaper at all in Providence, but they do an online thing. We toy with it with Franklin because there's so much potential in Franklin. But again, I've proposed it to my owners, and they said, "Great, do it." But I need money coming in to justify a reporter for Franklin. And so how do you, is the business owner, if he gave me, give me 1 year and I'll prove it to you, but almost no business owner is going to be willing to pay a salary out with no return at all and no guarantee at the end. And that's what it's come down to. So I would love to move into Franklin. I'd love to hire more reporters for Attleboro and stuff. And I think you can build that way, but again, I don't know how successful the Globe model in Providence is. I know a lot of people who subscribe to the Globe for it, but I'm not sure if it's enough to justify. They probably have 7 reporters now, and an editor there. Is it making it on its own, or is the Globe supporting Providence reporting? Yeah. So how long can that continue?
Good question. That's a good question. Noelle, what about, let's go back to staying on this theme of what might work. You've got ProPublica, you've got probably other examples. They're eluding me right now, but maybe you could remember some. Are there other examples of online, they don't have to be online only, but online operations that maybe are starting to fill the gaps a little bit as the world of traditional news becomes less and less established?
I mean, there's certainly no shortage of outlets at the moment, and I'm not sure that there really are that are filling the local gaps. I think that is the big problem.
Well, even the global, even the national.
Yeah, in the national.
Like BuzzFeed and those kind of things.
Sure, yeah, places like BuzzFeed and Vox, and I think they do a good job of generating interest in the issues that matter to the country, right? And they get people's eyes. They pull them in. It's frustrating too, though, because they often tend to gravitate, that kind of outlet tends to gravitate toward trendy things. So these are things that you're going to be able to get a lot of eyeballs online and get a lot of people who are clicking through. And so it can be a little difficult to keep interest up among some of the, more spinachy kind of topics, which when you get into a lot of political things, that's often that kind of falls by the wayside. You have a lot of identity politics, things like that they get people's emotions up high, and so you draw in a lot of people who are interested in hearing about them. These are important topics and things that we should be talking about, but when you talk about fiscal budgets or immigration numbers and things like that, when you get into the nitty-gritty, folks are a lot less interested. And so I guess the answer is it's really complicated. I think there is absolutely value in making news more accessible to more people, and so I'm grateful that has happened, but it also creates this idea that that you only need to pay attention to the juicy things, and also it's going to be delivered to you for free. And I think people get very used to that idea that you can just go onto websites and read a whole bunch of things for free, or you subscribe to Apple News and then you'll get everybody that way. But when it comes down to the individual newsrooms that are trying to chase down those stories and do that, frankly, more boring work, it's very important, but it can be much drier and more boring to some extent. They're not getting the subscriptions that are necessary to pay for that, which is exactly what Craig was saying about Franklin. So, yes, I need to get somebody in there, but I need a payroll to be able to justify that.
And in the old days, the news, it wasn't as though those fiscal stories, those stories about school boards or city councils, were really selling papers. Papers were sold for all kinds of reasons. They were sold for Dear Abby, they were sold for the comics, they were sold for sports, but there was also packaged along with that was this eat your spinach stuff, the good stuff, the stuff that, and so you were getting that all in one package. Now everything has been split up and atomized so much that you're getting like a thin feed of one particular type of news, and you have to, as a consumer of news, I think you have to go to a number of different sites in order to put together a package of what would be a kind of a whole view of things. Maybe you check, a sports site, an ESPN type site. Maybe then you go to a local news site. But then the local news site doesn't have the advantage of all of the eyeballs that are going to the sports site that are then serendipitously kind of migrating over and reading those other stories.
Exactly.
So you're really losing that now.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I think we're continuing to describe the problem, which we'll continue to do for a while, and then we'll kind of try to look for solutions. And keeping in mind that the theme here is rebuilding trust. So it's not necessarily just rebuilding trust in journalism, it's rebuilding trust in society. And we know, we've just gone through this period where you all probably were watching where we've had these hurricanes that hit Florida. And you've seen not just, we already know the journalists and that scientists in the case of, epidemiology and other, that they have been assailed by critics who are simply not trusting them. But even now even weathermen, weather watchers are being assailed. So I think people have written about this recently, about how the whole community of individuals, of people who had, quote, authority, who maybe were not totally worth feeling absolute trust in, but still 90% of the time were delivering the goods on letting us know what was happening. There's just this skepticism about everything now. And a lot of that is being driven by a kind of a skeptical wing within the press that is going beyond that to just assail anything that has authority. So in the case of local news, Craig, do you see that, are experts that you might turn to, are they feeling that at all? People, say, go back to COVID, for instance.
Yeah, COVID, I think Noelle could speak to that better with the environment, especially. I was amazed that last hurricane that people would actually, all this misinformation came out about the hurricane, and which is kind of mind-blowing because I thought it was pretty scientific. This is a hurricane, this is what happens, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there with it. For locally, it's not so much, it's no one trusts, even, like the Associated Press is the most, to me, they are black and white. They come here, if I'm the president, they're recording me, and that's it. And this is what Craig Borges said, boom, boom. I get complaints when we run, especially in the last several years, a story about, during COVID especially, that we're picking on the president. In this case, it was Donald Trump. And they say, you're so left, even your front page stories. I'm like, we don't cover the president, that's Associated Press. And they're saying, yeah, they're biased. And I'm reading what they're reading, and I don't even know what to tell these people because Donald Trump stood here and said this, the Associated Press did like a stenographer, put it in a newspaper, and they still say, but that's because he said something off the wall or whatever, that's picking on him. I don't know what to tell people that. And I don't know how I have a saying, you can't argue with people who can't tell the difference between fire and rain. I don't know what to say to these people. And I'm like, this is a basic reporting of the event. There's nothing slanted here, there's no slamming of Donald Trump, but they're convinced. And I got a massive cancellations, especially after 2020. Based on that. They thought we would just pick, and it's one thing if you say our opinion page, yeah, because we're admittedly, we're left on the opinion page, there's no doubt, but the reporting, and then to get down to local reporting, it's like, I don't know how to even address this issue, to tell you the truth.
The shocking thing is when you get people canceling from both sides for the same article.
No, that has happened.
And it's happened so many times. It's happened over climate change, over the pandemic, and all sorts of things. It is really difficult to figure out how to crack that nut. And I think a big part of the issue is that sort of the elites in politics would have Americans believe that we all live either here or way over there. And that is where the politicians live. They are incredibly far apart from each other, and even more so now, it seems, when you're in a presidential election year. But the reality on the ground, when you talk to people in your neighborhood, people who you work with, turns out there's actually a lot more middle ground to that. And Time Magazine had a big takeout this past summer, where they called it the myth of polarization. And basically they're getting at this exact point. And they start out their very long story on this with looking at a poll and I have it here just so I don't forget. So it was a survey where they asked respondents to rank goals for the nation. Basically, what kind of a nation do you want to leave for future generations? And the way that it all shook out, there was actually some surprising unanimity in how people were ranking their top priorities. Number one, people have individual rights. No surprise there. 2, people have high-quality health care. 3, successfully address climate change. Now, I want to pause on that one, because in many ways, we're told over and over again that climate change is one of the most divisive issues in the country. However, the majority of Americans see that as being up there with individual rights and high-quality health care. Now, are they going to agree on how to get and what successful addressing of climate change is? Probably not. There's probably going to be a lot of disagreement there. But they still are interested in that. But then it gets really interesting when the survey asked people to rank what they thought other Americans, how they would rank their priorities. You know where they put climate change there? Number 33. So respondents were saying that this was incredibly important to them, but nobody else cares about it. Everyone else must feel completely differently. They had no idea that this actually was a point that they shared, that they had a very common goal there. And I think that's worth keeping in mind when we're looking at the political campaign, and it feels like we are being just pulled apart. And I guess I want to add, just sort of underscore that transitive property there. It's not that we are apart, it's we're being pulled apart. And that's something that we can actively resist just by talking to each other. But that is something that happens an awful lot less these days. And that's partly because of the internet, because of social media. The pandemic really changed it. Hybrid work changed a lot. You're much less likely to have a conversation with someone you work with that is just, talking about the weather or hearing something humanizing about their family, or, oh, turns out you're dealing with aging parents too. We disagree on everything else in the world, but we're going through this common struggle, and we can share that and we can relate to each other. So I do see some hope in there, even though it does feel like we are being pulled apart at the seams.
Craig, in this area, Taunton in particular had bad floods, remember?
Yeah.
Was it a year ago or this past year?
Yeah, in North Attleboro.
North Attleboro. So are those kind of anomalous weather events? Maybe they occur periodically, but are they in any way attributed locally? Do people talk about that as being part of climate change?
Yeah, I agree with Noelle. When you talk to regular people, you're going to get some people who are just like, and I only know them through a random letter to the editor, and they'll say, it's all BS, there's nothing changing, But the average person is, I think that and healthcare are the two biggies. And, what blows me away about healthcare is Congress and Senate, as you know, they have a great health plan for life. And it is just simply mind-blowing to me. My wife is from Spain, and how Europe operates with their healthcare and how we don't. I don't understand how this hasn't been a revolution over this, that it costs you so much money if you break an arm or something like that. And I think the government, if the government's role as a far-right person would say is to protect its people, we have the strongest military. Isn't healthcare, isn't heart disease, isn't cancer, anything that can happen with health-wise, isn't that too an enemy? So shouldn't we be protecting our people with that? And everybody I talk to agrees on that, left and right. Yeah, our politicians, left and right, still, and I think it's maybe controlled by big business. And I always want to talk to the big business. Who are these people? Like the CEO of some big farm or something. It's like, don't you agree that and I'm sure that person does, but somehow it operates where, as long as it doesn't wreck my profits, and we operate with the worst healthcare system for an industrialized nation. And I don't know how that exists, but if you, like Noelle said, you talk to regular people and they're like, yeah, climate change and healthcare.
Yeah, interesting. By the way, just wanted to point out, the Monitor has a special issue coming up on climate change, or like in early November. Is that what it is?
Yeah, our November 4th issue is going to be, it's an expanded edition. We're normally 44 pages long, and this one's going to be 80 pages. And it's really trying to get at climate change in a way that bypasses that partisan rhetoric. So there are major hurdles to be crossed here, and that have to be cleared. But in terms of what governments should do, absolutely there are. But we really tried with this issue, where we're sort of revisiting a series that we started last year, where we went all over the world. We went to 6 different countries. We included the U.S. in there, but also Bangladesh. We went up to the Canadian Arctic, to Barbados, to Portugal, and looked for young people who are finding a way to build their own hope for the future. So we hear over and over again that our generations have failed the generations coming up behind us. But these kids are growing up not necessarily, maybe they're angry, they probably have some anger too, but they're instead going, well, okay, what am I going to do about it? And it's really inspiring to be able to see that. So you actually can, if you choose to subscribe today, you would be able to get that particular issue delivered to your mailbox. But I believe the local church is also generously offering some copies of that issue as well. So I encourage you to check out this table after we are done talking.
One thing on climate change locally are the nip bottles. So the little plastic nip bottles. This is one of those things. It's like, how can we be controlled by this big business, which is obviously controlling it? Massachusetts doesn't allow returns on nip bottles, so you see them all over the place, trash, and this plastic ends up in streams and back in the ocean, and we have so many plastic particles in our body as a result, and it's just getting worse and worse. There is no bottle bill for it. Every time the liquor industry rears its ugly head, we've editorialized, make them illegal or put a price on, 3 cents, 5 cents, whatever, and they'll disappear from the streets. The machinery involved in getting a refund they don't want to make it because it will cost the companies money that do that, so they're unwilling to get to touch their profits at all to make the machines capable of handling the nip bottle. The liquor industry doesn't want to get rid of nip bottles because it's such a huge markup, because you pay $3 for a little nip, where if you bought a bottle of whiskey, it's like $15, but they know they can get the $3. So it exists, and we had some major heavy hitters here in Attleboro alone. One was an advertiser who was so angry with us, they don't advertise anymore, because we said, they came up with a plan, we'll clean up the city, we'll do these cleanups. You can go out to Attleboro now with 1,000 people clean up nip bottles. By the end of the weekend, there's going to be 1,000 more nip bottles on the street. So That was BS. And so they put up little kiosks in their stores that you could put nip bottles in. It's all a Band-Aid. None of it addresses the issue. Why are we allowing these nip bottles is the issue. Why are they allowed? Either make them glass, all right, glass may be an environmental issue too, make them returnable or eliminate them. But we're stuck with nip bottles because the Massachusetts lawmakers won't touch, there's a lobbyist, and they won't touch the liquor industry, they won't touch the bottling industry. There's money to be made, somebody's getting money somewhere that they don't want to lose.
And I bet if you polled the community,
I don't know.
the majority would say.
That is the perfect left-right issue. I have far-right letter writers who write to me and they go out and collect nip bottles and they complain about it. Far left the same way. That is one issue I can say locally that unites everybody. I don't know anyone in favor of the nip bottles. Or if they say, all right, have them, that they don't want them returnable, where then they would eliminate like every other bottle on the street. But it's allowed.
Okay, why don't we open up for questions now, and I'll repeat the question. You go ahead and say it.
I just couldn't parse through it. He was talking about what kind of bottles?
I'm sorry, the little tiny nip.
Like the ones you have on the table?
Yeah.
Well, these are water. Water industry is another one. These aren't returnable in Massachusetts. They return. So
Busted.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, the little nip alcohol bottles you can return any other bottle, but well, not any. You can't return wine bottles, but at least they're glass. And these are the little plastic nip bottles. But that's a good example. These are a perfect example.
Yeah.
These are only returnable in Maine and New York. Why aren't they returnable in Massachusetts?
Yeah.
Or Rhode Island? Because
Recyclable in Rhode Island.
recyclable. That's about it. But
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, is it against journalistic ethics in some way to fact check letter writers, quote facts, or even stories that are quoting politicians and so forth? Is that too subjective?
no, I try. So it's a perfect example of law. The diminishing staff. So I've gotten nailed on letters that I've allowed through. I try to fact check every single one. It is a very time consuming thing because you put something in and you got a million sources and you got to go through, and so there's Snoops, there's a bunch of websites that will fact check people. Occasionally it's just, I'm flying by the seat of my pants where that I heard something about that. I'll give you one example. I got nailed on. It was it Kamala Harris wrote? I'm not sure if it was her. I can't remember who it was. Obama's wife wrote a book about something, a child's book or something. And a letter writer wrote in that they said they were selling it or something to new immigrants or something. And it's just a lot. I didn't even think about it because I heard something about it. No, what she had done was they had dropped off a bunch of them to like shelters and stuff. And it was totally made up story via Fox or Garbright or one of those far right ones. And I got nailed on that because luckily there's the readers that check me up and they'll be like, hey, you were wrong on this. It's like, okay, yeah, sorry. But no, it's not that we're supposed to fact check everything. It's just some things fall through the cracks.
Yeah, we do fact check what our sources are saying as well. And we have an obligation not to be putting misinformation out there. And so we do check what people are saying, and it is a tricky line to walk for sure, but it is something that we feel very strongly about. But there are certainly things that
Really,
slip through the cracks.
the definition of journalism is fact checking.
Yeah.
You're trying to establish facts and check the facts. Judy.
Yeah, earlier you were talking about the way people are polarizing one way or the other, and print journalism as well as television journalism or whatever is doing the same thing. I mean, I for one watch at least 2 or 3 channels when I get any piece of news. I think, wow, I agree with that, but I want to find out what the other side says, and I have to go to another channel. Is it possible or is it too expensive? Correct me on this, I can't remember the early one, whether it was McNeil Lair or whoever it was on television years and years and years and years ago, who had a program, had 2 opposite people. Every program showed both sides. Is it financially not feasible to do that in the print so that you can go ahead and have an opinion, but immediately next to it is the opposite opinion, so that you don't have to subscribe to 2 newspapers or watch 3 to 5 channels to get your balanced opinions?
I mean, that's the point-counterpoint thing. That
Yeah, we have a thing called Two Views, where somebody writes, I don't know, like, why I'm in support of getting rid of these, or somebody, why we can't get rid of them. And they'll be, we have that, we run that every Friday. Column-wise, most of my columnists tend to be left. I've had bad luck trying to get a decent person from the right who can, we can't pay, so cost is, first of all, right off the bat. All our columnists, I should say, tell you guys, write for free. They're just dedicated to it, and some of them are former journalists, former editors and stuff. They all write for free. I can't pay for opinion. We used to pay for opinion, but if I have $50, and that's what they were getting paid a column, that $50 I have to spend on a photographer to go to Attleboro High School football or something, because we have 10 football games every Friday night. That's what we're here for. We're not here to just, the role of the Sun Chronicle is not just to pontificate about what we think the way the world should be. Our role is to cover the local community. And so that's why I don't pay for opinion anymore. And it's just hard to find somebody from the right, especially after January 6th, because I will not allow a letter to the editor that says the election was stolen. That's like allowing a letter to the editor that says the earth is flat, as far as I'm concerned. So that doesn't, I tell people, you can rewrite this letter. That letter is not going to run. You're not going to say a factual thing that, there's no alternative fact here. So that's what's tough right there, because, and I found this, and this is all, I hate to blame one guy, but it's all from Donald Trump, because we used to have left and right all the time, and you could have debate policy and everything, but now it's become so extreme where you're not even debating policy, you're making up stuff, and I can't allow made up stuff to be in the paper, although occasionally it does slip through.
We don't do this side by side too often. You will see there are copies of our most recent political cover story, which we did do a side by side there, where we did a big takeout on looking at Kamala Harris's record and Donald Trump's record, and trying to sort of like, let's set aside what they say they're going to do, let's look at what they actually have done in the past and how that might inform how they would govern. And so we have both of those side by side. Generally, our approach is more to try and integrate, and we try to bring balance to every story that we write. I'm sure that, as in all things, we do not live up to that standard every single day, but we strive to, and we work very hard to, and we have a lot of sometimes heated conversations in the newsroom about that. And it's like, okay, so you're gonna cover this, this one idea that is very, very important to people on the right. Well, then are you going to cover this other idea that is extremely important to people on the left? And it is always the goal, but it is always something to shoot for. And I don't feel like there is actually a landing point where you can never say you've arrived at objectivity. This is just something that you continually work at.
I think you're seeing with these two professionals, you're seeing an attempt to try to restore trust, try to build trust. And I wonder if you all, in continuing this conversation, have any ideas on how we can regain a trust. I mean, maybe it was an illusion. Maybe we never really lived in an era when we trusted each other more, when left and right could talk more. I think we did. I think I lived through that. I think all of us did, when there were more measured debates about policy rather than just the attempt to tear down other people and to to score points for your side. But does anyone here have a thought about this whole idea of how a community can build trust? I mean, you can do it with journalism, but if you're not supporting the journalism or you're not subscribing to the journalism, it's pretty hard to do. Any thoughts on that from anyone?
To me, it seems like the real problem is advertising. That it used to be that, I can remember when I was a kid, they said, oh, newspapers get 90% of their funding from advertisements. I was just astounded. You know, I was a delivery boy, right? That kind of, how could that be? But I think that that's the problem. You know, you got Bliss, right, to help out,
Yeah.
and you got Smuckers, right? But really, the advertising has dried up for print, unfortunately, for the local newspapers and things. And then I would say, you know, the newspaper has a nice variety. You know, we like the puzzles, the cartoons, the sports. You know, it's all a good package. It's just, you know, the major supporter is the advertiser. He's the one paying the price, right? And I don't know, they don't have the coupons anymore, right?
So I can address some of those. Coupons are a big thing in flyers. So the national chains, Home Depot, Lowe's, we'll probably get them around Christmas time. CVS pulled out completely, which I couldn't understand. We did a campaign taking emails to send to CVS. I always say it was some 20-something who made the decision to pull CVS flyers out of newspapers because every person of a certain age would grab that CVS flyer every Sunday, and now they're gone. And that was that cut a ton of money right there. And all of them followed suit. Walgreens, like I said, Target may advertise at Christmas time, but they don't need us anymore. They do their own advertising. And same with with the exception of like Bliss Brothers, the locals, Willow Tree. Thank God for these guys. They help us stay alive. Because it's the little guys that keep us alive. Riley and Son Oil Company, there's a few you'll see in the Sun Chronicle over and over again. If we do all the sports like the All-Stars, that's a lot of work. We have to, get a sponsor for that. Riley and Son in North Attleboro, they'll come through every time. And I'm not sure, the whole thing is they want to be part of the community, to keep the conversation, to keep the Sun Chronicle alive. And the big corporations don't care if we exist or not. And so it used to be like 90%, and now that's really shifting. And what the rumor, well, I know this for a fact, it's not a rumor, the Boston Globe now, if you call them for a home subscription, they'll tell you it's $100 a month. No one's paying $100 a month. If you say, oh, that's too much, they're going to go drop down. But we're in this bad spot, so this could be the only hope for journalism. If you get over this, and everything's digital, if I got rid of the print product tomorrow, we'd be fine, money-wise. But if we could convert everyone over to digital, but not everyone wants digital. So, and then digital, you can't charge, our rate for a monthly subscription is like $27 a month. For digital, I only get $12 a month. So I can't charge $27 a month for digital. People would be like, I'm not paying that for digital. They don't believe in the product. And even the advertiser, like say I go to a car dealer and say, hey, do you want to take an ad in the Sun Chronicle? What's the cost? I'm just throwing a figure out there. Oh, $5,000 color ad. Okay. Do you want to put it on the web? Yeah, how much? $4,000. No, I'll give you $50 for that. They don't believe in the web. So that's a tough thing to overcome because a lot of people say, why do you continue printing a newspaper? That's where the money comes from still. Subscription and advertising. So eventually, if the paper went away and everyone was on digital, then I think that will probably come in 5 or 6 years, maybe not for us, but that's what the Globe's, I think, goal is, to get people off. Home delivery is extremely costly. We have to pay newspaper carriers. It's incredible, the cost that goes into delivering a newspaper. And you can only charge so much of people, like I'm not paying for it anymore. And if you can convert those people and then charge the same amount, then that's the hope for local journalism.
Yeah, and I think that the Monitor has been through that experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely been through that for sure. But I mean, I wanted to add too that the shift away from advertising has opened the door for what's called sponsored content. And so sometimes when you're flipping through a newspaper or reading online, you may not realize this, but it's not actually written by a journalist, what you're reading. It is written by a corporation, and somewhere there's some fine print saying that this is sponsored content. And this is something that replaced revenues from advertising. But I think it's something that is contributing to the lack of trust in the media too, because how are you going to feel if you get to the end of an article and you've just imbibed all of this and taken it in as fact, and then you find, well, wait a minute, this is not written by someone who's attempting to be impartial. This is clearly written by someone who has an agenda. That may sour you entirely on that whole publication or on the media in general. So, yeah.
And we haven't even started talking about artificial intelligence.
Oh, gosh.
We won't talk about that now. So I think we're probably at the end of our formal time, but we can keep talking after this. I thought I would end with this very secular benediction from Martin Luther King Jr. In his Christmas Eve sermon of 1967. This is about building trust. He said, "It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one destiny affects all indirectly." And I think that's where we are. I mean, we all live in the same community, whether that community is Attleboro, or Taunton, or Boston, or the world. We're all living in that community. We're all in need of trusting one another and working with each other. We can't go it alone. And we don't necessarily all agree on a common set of facts any longer, apparently, because the internet and wedge media have tended to kind of break us away from that. But there's got to be hope that we hang together, because it's the only way we're going to go forward, whether it's on climate change or whether it's on democracy, is to trust one another, it seems. So with that, why don't we just end the formal part, and then we can keep talking, if you want, afterwards informally.
Thank you all so much, and thank you all for coming. I'd just like to point out, I'm sure you're all inspired if you aren't already subscribers. The Christian Science Monitor here has cards with QR codes for subscribing. And as of today, if you subscribe, you'll get that special double edition. As Noelle mentioned, the local Christian Science Church has also ordered 50 copies, and there's a QR code for that. No strings attached. There's a place to sign up, and they will mail you that copy when it comes out, the November 4th issue, for free. The Sun Chronicle, there are free copies on the back table of recent monitors of this weekend's Sun Chronicle, and there are also flyers with QR codes and a poster to subscribe to the Sun Chronicle. And if anyone has had delivery issues with the Chronicle, I encourage you to talk to Craig. It's not an easy job, as he was saying, delivery, but it's worth fighting for. So again, thank you all. I hope the conversation continues.
By the way, who would have covered the escaped bulls in Attleboro? I was telling Craig that when I was at the Globe, one Saturday night, I was on the night desk, and it was the night that Little Joe, the great ape, escaped from...
Silverback gorilla, right?
Yeah, silverback gorilla, escaped from Franklin Park Zoo. It was the same thing. No matter what the stories are in a metropolitan area, no matter how important, a bond issue is, or that's the story that riveted everybody. That escaped ape running through Roxbury that was a big deal. And those bulls were a big deal here.
Yeah, it was, that's for sure.
Well, thank you all, and just kind of let's just informally talk if you want.
I have a question. The other day I heard on the radio that Biden said, "My Inflation Reduction Act caused this." And we all know that he would have never had the Inflation Reduction Act if it wasn't bipartisan. Now, is there any way that newspapers could, put in a footnote saying that Inflation Reduction Act was bipartisan?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Hank, you know,
Yeah,
for
you
us to do it, it would be, you know,
you.
it's like, for me to fact check every Associated Press story, you just never get a paper out. You know, so, that, you know, should Associated Press have that in the transition graph? Yeah, they probably should. Shame on them if they didn't. You know.
But I think that's a thing that you hear almost all politicians
Yeah.
do. You know, Donald Trump will talk about his particular policy or his particular thing, and even, you know, Barack Obama the other day when he was giving a speech talked about, he said that 2019, that wasn't Donald Trump's economy, that was my economy. Well, obviously it wasn't his economy, but, you know, that's just a kind of a thing that politicians do, sort of like signing the stimulus checks. You know, it's money's coming from the Treasury, but it had Donald Trump's signature on it,
Well,
so people believed it was coming from
every
him.
president takes the credit for the good economy
Exactly.
and slams the other one for the bad
Exactly.
economy. All, you know, no one's going to take, so I messed up.
Yeah, I mean, though, you know, the economy doesn't change on a dime.
Yeah.
And usually what's happening under an incumbent president it's because of what happened before them as well. And it's what they were saying what Martin Luther King was saying in that quote that you just read, that it is all one fabric and it's all connected.
And you were talking about trust and how we can get more trust in journalism. And you had mentioned earlier about the most important things, and when you did the surveys, everybody was interested in climate change but didn't think the others were. Well, a radical thought, but everybody's interested. They don't want to necessarily read about it, but they're interested in what's good.
Yeah.
And journalism, like anything else, has to print what sells, and what's sensational sells. But I'm going to try to come to two things here. One, I think one of the most effective things about the vice president debate was people were talking, all the stations were trying to say who won and who lost. And my response was, they both won because both honored each other and respected each other. And it seems to me it would be a very gutsy move for journalism to go and forget about the negativity on either side and report what people do like. I can give you a quick example. When I was growing up in town, it had a newspaper, and friends of mine, older friends, I was kid, lobbied for this, but they got it. And every November, the week of Thanksgiving, their newspaper had nothing negative in it. It became, and it was the best-selling newspaper every year, that newspaper, because they printed nothing negative. So it would be gutsy for newspapers to do this and leave the negativity to somebody else.
Interesting idea.
It would be tough. As I say, we don't report when planes land, we report when planes crash.
I know.
Well, I mean, I do have to say that, so the Monitor does, of course, talk about when there are extreme problems, but one of the things that our editor-in-chief, Mark Zappenfield, likes to say is that the Monitor has a bias for hope. And that means that even in the most horrific stories that we're writing, we're still looking for, okay, but who is looking for a way out? Who is looking for a way forward? And we feel it is really important to shine a light on those dark places and bring those home to readers. But it's equally important to show that the response and the answer to that does not have to be apathy and does not have to be giving up on the potential for progress. And that's our challenge at the Monitor. But frankly, that's hard to sell. And we do find that there is an audience out there, that we hear a lot about news avoiders. And so, that is a big topic of conversation for us, is, the thing that news avoiders say they want is just that, is someone who is able to be pragmatic about the problems and the challenges, but still look for hope and look for progress and find places where that is actually truly happening. So if you're craving that, I urge you to subscribe to the Monitor.
Okay, with that, shall we?
I think there were a few.
Oh, were there a few others? I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, we could just.
I was going to say that some of the things I kind of missed, I remember when USA Today went color, and it was like, oh yeah, what a gimmick, And when I go to USA Today, now every once in a while they have the political cartoons. Those all went away. I don't know where they went, right? And then the other thing I remember, the Monitor, I think it was the second Enduring Freedom or whatever it was, and had a page of all these quotes about war. Somehow the Monitor collected that, and that was very, very interesting and very, you know what I mean? What people said in the past, 1,000 years ago, still true today. So those sorts of things are very, very interesting. And I kind of miss them. I haven't seen that sort of thing.
Well, I just have to say that it's a very difficult climate in which we live, where one of the one who has been a president and is now running for president again, is just spreading so much negative and really nasty and mean kind of things saying about people, as well as just making up stuff all the time and lying all over the place. I mean, it's just very hard to live with that, and it's hard. I've always believed that you're entitled to your own opinion, but not to your own facts. And I think it's your job, and to point that out to people. The facts are this. And but you've got this person who's just riding on a whole wave of fear and.
Well, in some ways, I think you're dealing with, until the late 19th century, most of the press in America was highly partisan. It was run by political parties. It was run by, owners who had, like Hearst and Pulitzer, who had a kind of an agenda. And then this whole model of advertising came along where you wanted to kind of be a little more balanced because Macy's didn't want its ads to be up against people who were breathing fire against half of their customers or the other half of their customers. So, most of us have lived through an era of more polity, more commonality in media. And then we're now seeing that being destroyed, in part by the internet and in part by a kind of a partisan press, but in part too by politicians, not just Donald Trump, who've picked up on that and who are using that to kind of drive wedges in and carve off their particular fervid base of people. So, I'm thankful for having lived in a period when we had that kind of more, when you could tune into the CBS Evening News and everybody sort of agreed that this is essentially the reality we lived in. But that doesn't exist. That's now being changed, and what we're looking for is ways forward that will bring us to some sort of a new level of trust, even if it doesn't look like the old one.
America was an outlier for that, though. If you look at the UK, you got the Guardian on the left, you got the Mail on. I mean, they were very, and they were always, and they never have changed. You got far right and you got far left all the time, and it blew me away as a young journalist when I first go to England or Scotland. Like, oh my God, these papers are so just blatantly in their news articles and everything, monarchy or anti-monarchy or whatever it was, and we didn't have that. So it was, I think, a small period of time in the history of journalism, and it's gone away, or it's going away. And so you are going to see more partisan, definitely. I think we're in the twilight of that.
Yeah.
of that era
It's
that we all grew up with.
What's the term? The term is creative destruction.
I talk to so many people and say, oh, I don't subscribe to whether it's a Sun Chronicle, New York Times, Boston Globe. I get my, I just look at Google and I'm like, do you think Google has reporters? It's like they just steal from everyone else. Canada just put a stop to it too, where they can't just take, you have to give them permission or you get money back or something like that. America, it's a free-for-all. And they're the ones that are killing us. And, in my argument, I always end the thing, free news is free news. You're going to get what you pay for. And that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Yahoo, Google. It's all the same. There's a reason we're paid. We're professionals. We know how to go after a story. We know how to write. We know how to look for both sides. As Nicole says, you try your best to get both sides.